Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're now 8 minutes into this second hour, and for the rest of the hour in studio, I am joined by director and filmmaker Philip Klein. He's made some other award-winning films in the past, but his new film is Begging for Billionaires, the attack on property rights in America. And for those that don't know, this isn't just eminent domain. They now, on the Supreme Court ruling, can say if a private interest can lobby and pay money to state and local governments, open bribes are legal according to the Supreme Court, and that they can then take your property, and in many cases, if you refuse to sell, they don't just take it, they then charge you attorney bills. So you're paying to have your land stolen, and under taxpayer property owner Bill of Rights in Texas, we've all, my family, gotten letters from the state saying, if we want to do something to your property or buy it or take it or put a pipeline across it or build something on it, you got a few months to accept our deal or we'll just basically take it. This is the new America, and he is the official selection for quite a few big film festivals, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Best of the Festival, International Film Festival, official selection, Texan Dance Film Festival, selected for the New Braunfels Big Film Festival to be their main film coming up in a few days. And so we're joined by Philip Klein here in studio. We're going to play a trailer for those listening on the radio. You'll be able to see it at prisonplanet.tv. We are simulcasting right now at prisonplanet.tv. Mr. Klein, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Alex, for having me.
It's good to have you here. So tell the listeners a little bit about how you made this film, why you got involved, and about the film itself.
Well, I got involved with this film because a good friend of mine was losing his property for the second time. I mean, he's gone through about 40 years of threats of eminent domain, and this one was really was real. And I decided, being a filmmaker, to document his process and his struggle trying to keep his property. We also had 5 other families, both in Sugar Creek and St. Louis, Arnold, Missouri, and another couple areas. And we spent 4 years following their struggle and their anguish and their story. And I think that's very important for people to see their story and actually see the turmoil. They're losing their property. They're losing their memories. You know, it's not just about the brick and mortar. It's about the memories and the things in the house.
Well, it was Stalin, evil genius that he was, that said, one death is a tragedy, 10,000 deaths is a statistic. So by going in and personalizing, I've done that on the radio, but not like film can do. These families in New London, Connecticut, as an example, they would have lived there 3-4 generations, nice homes, waterfront, and they'd say, we don't want to sell, and they would just come force and take it. This was for private interest.
Well, what's interesting was up at the St. Paul, Minneapolis Film Festival, we had a discussion afterward, and we had one of the guys from Institute of Justice, and he said after 4 years, that property is just a big empty lot of weeds and broken buildings. They haven't built anything. The development basically never materialized.
They just wanted it.
Yeah. And they tore down all those homes and businesses, and it's sitting empty. And this happened in Kansas City with the Glover plan. It said for 8 years they tore down all the homes and businesses until we threatened to turn them in for bond fraud because they were using the bond money. And
I haven't seen your film yet, but I know it's gotten rave reviews. I've been so busy; it just came in a few days ago. But we interviewed Gore Seafood down in Texas, there since World War II, $15 million profit a year. And the heir to Mobil wanted it for a yacht parking lot and was trying to take it last time I talked to him. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. What's interesting about the documentary is we went in and we exposed the collusion between the developers and the politicians. And their little backroom deals and all. And basically what it is the politicians developers would come to the politicians and saying, we want a certain block or 10 blocks or whatever it is, which they've cruised around neighborhoods, especially where they're really targeting is low-income areas.
Because they can't fight back.
Yeah. Minority areas.
But they've kind of run through a lot of those snacks, though. They're even going after wealthy people now.
Yeah. And which is interesting is the politicians basically have a sign on their front lawn, we can be bought, And
for those that don't know, the Supreme Court ruling said that. They said people can give money politically to counties and cities and states to have them take other people's property. And in the case of New London, Connecticut, if you fight it, they then don't just take your property and condemn it with no money. They then charge you lawyer bills for you fighting it. I mean, this is people got mad in the U.S. thinking they were just taking it for eminent domain. They didn't know that this is where they rob you, and then you've got to pay a fine to them because they robbed you. Kind of like when Monsanto, their genetics gets into your crops. You can prove you didn't steal their seeds. Then they've contaminated you, but they own the St. Louis federal court. And so that's the one court nationwide it goes to. And so they always rule for them. They contaminate you, and then you've got to pay them for being contaminated.
But it's interesting. If you don't want to move, and a good example was Daryl Penner. What they did to Penner is they turned off his electricity, which is illegal.
Tell folks where he was located. Tell them the background on that.
He was on Maine since the early 1940s. This is like the second generation of a tuxedo rental place. And what's funny about it is the same politicians that took his property rent tuxedos from him because it's right down from City Hall. And they turned off his electricity, his power. They put a fence around his property, and then they finally, to force him out, blocked off the street, cutting off his customers coming, so he had no choice to move. And
I mean, that's terrorism.
Yeah. And they used, by the way, they also used code enforcement with police to come in and terrorize them.
Oh, no, in Austin, they have special code enforcing cops. They're like kept minions. And, of course, you've seen this around the country. And we always found that the hospitals have a database. It goes to the health department. Then they seed this out. When an old man has cancer, had a heart attack, and they profile him, $2,000 a day fines, Roland Ellingson, for 3-inch grass. And the neighbors next door could have 4-inch grass. They didn't care. The cops would come and fine him. And then if he smarted off, they would arrest him. I mean, how do they get... That is so evil.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because in the documentary, we went around to all these politicians. A tool that they use is called blight. Now, it's a very effectful tool that they use.
They did that here, but I went and showed their houses were worse than the houses they were taking.
But it's interesting, when we took the camera and we found out, being an activist, the camera, and I'll tell the audience this, is the most powerful weapon you have. The politicians can't stand it.
It's like a cross to a vampire.
Yeah. So we went in and interviewed these politicians, and not one of us could tell us what the definition of blight was. They gave us these half-truth, half-question explanations.
They never let you pin them down.
Yeah, exactly. They couldn't pin them down to what blight really meant. And this is a tool they use. It could be a gutter off, newspapers on your driveway, your grass too high, or maybe some... I
have seen them saying 2 planters in an old lady's backyard that had no plants in them. Just having that was blight.
Wow.
I've seen an old doghouse be blight. I've seen a creek 20 yards off the property line blocked up with brush. That's blight. And that was my grandparents. They said, we're going to give you $2,000 a day fines in Austin till you clean that out. And my grandpa wasn't the type to not think to call people to come do it or to say, no, I don't own that property. He went back there, did it, had a heart attack, and then that later killed him. But, so Austin, pretty much killed my grandfather. I mean, they're really nice people. The government's great people, yeah.
Well, it's interesting, that what happened in Sugar Creek is another example. They basically forced all the people out in this whole block except this one woman, Penelope Marsh. And what happened was she stayed, and they harassed her. And interesting, she tells a story in the documentary that the guy, head of the redevelopment agency, lived right across the street, was getting a wine tasting business in this new shopping center. And he was the one pushing it. I mean, well,
that's what you find in Austin. They fund malls that are government paid for, and then the city council people's wives get free shops. I mean, it's just crime syndicate.
Yeah, and the funny part is, you go to the feds, you go to the law enforcement, they just laugh at you.
Well, they're on the payroll.
Yeah, and it's really shocking to see. In this documentary, we got Daryl Penner's deposition of Whitney Kerr. Whitney Kerr was the scumbag who goes around basically collecting all the properties with phony corporations and stuff so people wouldn't know what was really going on. And in the deposition, he goes to Daryl Penner's property.
Tell folks where this is again.
This is in downtown Kansas City, Missouri.
Yes.
And he basically says Daryl Penner's property, the American formal wear, is like amoeba in the body. It gets sick and wears out and dies and got to be replaced by new amoebas. And when I heard that in the deposition, I go, God, we got to use that, because it was just unbelievable that some of the stuff that...
That's what Hitler did.
Yeah, some of the stuff that Whitney Kerr says in this deposition is shocking, but it shows how they think.
No, take CPS. In Texas, they put over 2/3 of the kids on drugs, and they just get up in front of the state and go, these kids all have bad genes. There's no test for bad. It's all just made up. But they always say, you're a disease, you're bad.